Welcome to the Who Knows This podcast, where I track down in the trenches experts to answer questions that we all want the answers to. I'm Sam Visnic, and I'm a veteran in working with people with chronic aches and pains by way of massage therapy, exercise, pain education, hypnotherapy, and lifestyle education. Today, we're going to talk about retraining the brain for chronic conditions. So let's get started. All right, welcome. And today I want to introduce my guest here, read a quick bio so you know who we're going to be talking to, Ashok Gupta, and he is an internationally renowned speaker, filmmaker, and health practitioner who has dedicated his life to supporting people through chronic illness and achieving their potential. Ashok suffered from ME, or chronic fatigue syndrome, around 25 years ago when he was studying at Cambridge University. Through neurological research that he conducted, he managed to get himself 100% better, which is very impressive. He then set up a clinic to treat others and then published the well-known neuroplasticity recovery program, known as the Gupta Program, in 2007. He has published several medical papers and is continually researching these chronic conditions. Recently, a randomized controlled trial was published showing the Gupta Program was highly effective compared to a control, and more information about this can be found on his website, which we'll link to. Ashok is on a mission to research and support people with chronic illness through an integrated and holistic lifestyle approach. So let's chat with him. All right, Ashok, thank you so much for being here. This is going to be a very, very interesting talk for our viewers out there. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of new information here, but I would say critically important stuff as we're kind of heading into this new forefront of neuroscience as it applies to health and a lot of things that it seems like we're just starting to be on the verge of discovering. So thank you so much for being here. And, starting this off, I think one of the best places to start is you have such an interesting history in terms of how you started on this path. Can you tell us kind of like where this all started for you and how you've gotten to where you are right now and doing what you're doing?
Sure. So first of all, thank you, Sam, for inviting me onto your podcast. Really excited to be here. So like many of us, we start on this journey because we've been through a challenge ourselves. And that's what I went through. So many, many years ago when I was studying as an undergrad at Cambridge, I went to India and got a stomach bug. Yeah. And I thought nothing of it. I'll overcome the stomach bug. No big deal. And the stomach bug seemed to go away. But when I went back to university, I just seemed to start feeling worse and worse and worse, to the point at which I would pick up a textbook and couldn't read the words on the page. I couldn't concentrate. I felt like just sleeping 24 hours a day. In my worst days, I had to crawl to the bathroom. And essentially, I went to doctors and saying, what on earth is going on here? And I had all the blood tests, and there's nothing that they could find. And they said, eventually, we think you've got this thing called ME, or chronic fatigue syndrome. And there's no cure, and there's nothing that we can do for you. And imagine, you're in your early 20s, and that's the diagnosis you're given. And I was just like, there's a brick wall in front of me saying, right, that's it. Your life's over. You might have this for the rest of your life. And that for me was the beginning of a quest where I made a promise with the universe or God or whatever you want to believe in, saying, if I can get better from this, if I can get myself well and figure this out, I'm going to dedicate the rest of my life to helping others with this condition, because there's so many people that I met who are suffering in a similar way, thousands of people, hundreds of thousands of people. And I made it my lifelong quest to try and beat this, just for myself, but then eventually for everybody else as well. So that's how my journey started along this path.
In a common scenario, which I'm sure lots of people out here with the current kind of frustration with some of these chronic, or what we would call exclusionary diagnoses, right? So they go in and they test you for everything inside and out, and there's nothing that shows up on the labs. And then they say, well, technically you're healthy and you're fine, but you're clearly not. So that's very frustrating for a lot of people, because it almost kind of leads them into that mentality in which almost that obvious, sometimes it's for the most part, is hardly ever said, but it's a psychosomatic illness, right? You're making it up, or you're just having some kind of an experience, but there's nothing wrong with you. Right. Mm-hmm. So I can imagine how stressful that is, especially if you were in your early 20s and not knowing anything about what you know now clearly, and how terrifying that type of thought process is doctors telling you nothing wrong with you, but your experience is telling you otherwise.
Yeah, I mean, it was awful. I mean, and of course, you feel depressed as a result. So the doctors say, it must be depression, right? So they put me on antidepressants, but they actually made me feel worse. So, it was a really challenging time. But, I really persisted with it. I said, right, I'm going to research my way through this like many of us do. So I read about brain neurology, about physiology. I really went deep trying to understand this. And I figured out in my own head, I started just playing with my own consciousness. Not that this is in your mind, but it is in the brain, in my view. And so experimenting with little brain exercises and different things I could do, gradually worked out what I think caused it, and then wrote a medical hypothesis and got myself fully 100% better. And that paper was published in a medical journal, and then went on to open up a clinic to support other people's journeys with these conditions.
Now, I'm curious, and along that path, because I want to break that apart and to say, when you started this, I think that when most people get into this situation, and I always talk about in my podcast, I had started around the region of the early 2000s. And at the time, there was the splinter of like the complementary field into things talking about, functional medicine, which is, I think the theory that had come up a lot, which people are talking about, and still today, even though there's a lot of questionable concepts around it, people were starting to think that this was all based upon adrenal fatigue, right? You remember when that started to come out and saying, well, what this was is a cortisol-based imbalance and the person can't cope with stress anymore. So I'm curious, is that when you started doing your research, which direction or pathway did you start from? Did you start with the endocrine system, with the immune system? How did you get to the brain-based materials? Where did you start with that? And what kind of ideas did you tinker with it that led you to it?
I think this is such a fascinating question. For me, it had to be the brain right from the start. And I'll share why. In these conditions, every single cell, muscle, and fiber of someone's being and every organ seems to be impacted, right? And what I noticed was that most medicine was based on what is measurable. And what is measurable is in the body. But the brain was a black box. and neuroscience, certainly in the 90s when I was researching this, was not particularly that far advanced in terms of fMRI and all those that kind of knowledge just the last 20 years or so. Even neuroplasticity wasn't necessarily a concept back then. And so I thought this has to be in the brain, and let's look at the key researchers who are researching the brain from a psychological perspective, because that's where a lot of the work was being done at that time. So especially the work of Professor Joseph Ledoux, who was a specialist in the amygdala and fear responses. And I suddenly realized that it is modern medicine, or certainly at that time, that created this false dichotomy between psychology and physiology. And that these two things were separate. Yeah. And I realized that there's no way they're separate in terms of how the brain functions. So as medicine looks at it, yes, they're separate. But we as human beings and our brains simply focus on what is survival, what ensures the passing on of my genes to the next generation. And it made sense to me that the brain, being the head of the nervous system, is like your central processing unit. That's where the intelligence lies. So whatever happens in the rest of your body is being directed by the brain. And that secondly, the brain can make mistakes. Yeah, as much as we'd love to see this brain as perfectly functioning, actually it makes little mistakes. Now we see them as mistakes, but the brain doesn't see it as mistakes. The brain says, what's the priority? The priority is survival. What do we as human beings want? We want to feel good and healthy and positive, right? So the two things are at odds. And so it occurred to me that actually maybe the brain is creating this artificial environment in the body in terms of an immune response and a nervous system response, because it is overprotecting the system to ensure survival, to ensure the passing on of genes to the next generation. And so following that flow of that scientific flow, it made sense that this was a conditioned response or a learnt response in the brain, which was having all the downstream effects in the body. And I started playing with my consciousness, trying to understand what on the periphery of consciousness was going on. Because every emotional or psychological condition has a physiological component. We know 50% of depression is now actually inflammation caused. And in the same way, every physical condition has a mental or emotional component. So when you have flu, you feel demotivated, you feel tired, etc. That's deliberate so that you stop, running a marathon and focus on healing and calming your body. So when you get past this kind of modern dichotomy of medicine, then you start realizing there's something deeper and profound, which is the neurology, the neuroplasticity of our brains and how it gets stuck in these responses. So that's how I went to that area.
And being stuck in those responses is an interesting one. And I'll draw some parallels as those of us for the listeners. One of the things that completely changed the way that I practice and working with people with chronic pain was when I started, first of all, information that has been around for a long time, right? There was the gate control theory had come out, and then there was a long gap of time where there wasn't a lot of talk about or advancement of theories on chronic pain. And now it was exploding when the neuroscience stuff came on board and people were looking to that direction. And one of the things that came out of that was a concept of pain neuroscience education, which is kind of a summation of all of the information and the research that shows on pain and what is actually happening when people have pain. And the interesting part is this distinction between when somebody has an acute injury and they have a chronic injury. And the difference between the two is, of course, tissue healing. So when there's actually damage to the body, it makes sense for there to be inflammation. It makes sense for there to be pain. But when the tissue heals, then there's no inflammatory response occurring anymore, but the person is still feeling pain. So there has to be something in there that is a conditioning element, just like you had talked about, where somehow the brain or the nerves get stuck doing this repetitive pattern, even though there's not an actual problem happening. Which, funny enough, though, in our experience, we still feel the pain, but our brain can't square up. When we look at it consciously, there's nothing wrong with us. So this becomes a big problem. So that is super interesting. And you're like, and that's what I had thought. Somehow something is stuck. It's like the dial is still staying in one direction. And this is a subconscious process. So a lot of times we just get better, but now we actually have to interact with it in some way to change it. So super interesting. And I have so many questions on that. And so when we start to look at the brain, do we know which areas tend to get stuck or what is actually occurring? What did your research show was actually happening in that process?
Well, there are so many brain structures that are involved in obviously the experience of pain. Right. So, there's the periaqueductal gray, there's parabrachial nucleus, there's the amygdala, the insula, the anterior cingulate, prefrontal cortex. All of these different brain structures create a coordinated communication response to deal with the danger. Because when you experience pain, as far as the brain is concerned, that is a danger to survival. So if you cut yourself or you fall over, signaling goes to the brain goes into emergency mode and tries to figure out the appropriate immune solution, physiological solution, psychological solution to that particular injury, let's say. Now, what then happens is we believe the core conditioning lies in two brain structures, the amygdala and the insula, when it comes to pain networks, responses such as fibromyalgia or even autoimmune conditions like rheumatoid arthritis. But then when it comes to immunological conditions like long COVID and ME, chronic fatigue syndrome, similarly, the conditioning is occurring in the amygdala and the insula. And there were, for us, this was a hypothesis. And then animal studies over the last 10 to 15 years have started reinforcing that fact that actually immune conditioning and pain conditioning in animal studies also seems to be rooted in the amygdala and insula as well. So that was a kind of fascinating confirmation of what we'd always hypothesized, here at the clinic. And the way that I'd like to kind of describe it is when somebody goes through some kind of acute event, let's say, or acute insult, what are the primary triggers? So the primary trigger for pain is maybe an injury, an accident, maybe a localized pain syndrome. Yeah. In the case of ME and chronic fatigue syndrome, it would be a bug, a virus, bacterial infection, or indeed long COVID would be COVID-19 infection. Normally, our bodies deal with the danger, deal with that situation, and then switch off and go back to standby mode, like switching off your TV. Switch it on, switch it off, go to standby mode. But what happens is, in those situations, if there is some kind of genetic or physiological or emotional vulnerability in the system, that acute event actually triggers what we call conditioning, where the brain thinks, in order to be efficient, I want to see what circumstances did this situation occur. So if this situation occurs in the future, I can create a similar event. And this is feeding on Pavlovian conditioning. So I'm sure a lot of your listeners will be aware of this, the Pavlovian conditioning, the idea that dogs would salivate if they're fed. And Pavlov noticed, very famous professor, that if you rang a bell, just ringing the bell would make the dog salivate. Now, the bell has got nothing to do with food, but it starts creating a meaning in the person's mind because it occurred at the same time. And that's classical conditioning. And so what happens is, if that acute experience becomes prolonged and there's something present at the same time, a bell, then what can happen is, even once the original insult has been removed from the system, like bacteria or whatever it may be, the system, when the bell is rung, starts responding with the same pain networks, triggering that response. And in our experience, this is the key exciting bit, not exciting for the people who suffer from it, but from a neurological perspective, the exciting bit of neurology here is the output and the input of the system get connected. And let me explain this in terms of pain, because I know that's your specialism. In our hypothesis, the brain becomes hypersensitive to signals of pain from the body, which remind it of the original insult, right, which may have been an injury or an accident. So these pain signals are coming from the body up through the spinal cord, through the periaqueduct gray, parabrachial nucleus, into a hypersensitive brain. The brain says, oh dear, last time we experienced that kind of pain, there was some kind of injury. Right, the right response here is to trigger localized or generalized inflammation in order to deal with that particular injury site. So a massive amount of inflammation is then caused in the body locally or generally, which then causes the very pain in those hypersensitized areas that then feeds back to a hypersensitive brain, hypersensitive response, hypersensitive brain. So the brain and body get stuck in a game of tennis. They're whacking the ball against each other faster and faster and faster, causing this kind of chronic ongoing response. And so not only is there that vicious loop, but all of the nerve fibers and the neuropathy, they're all getting highly sensitized as well, sometimes even damaged. So there can be organic damage as well. But in general, the whole system has got locked in a short circuit. So when you short circuit a battery or short circuit something, the switch flips on your electrical circuit. So in the same way, we believe these conditions are caused by the input and the output of the system getting locked together.
And it's super complicated, but generally from a big picture standpoint, sounds super simple, almost very simple. And I think this is where it's getting interesting, is that a lot of the explanations, it sounds, in the psychotherapy and the psychology field, which is kind of already assumed and known, is those concepts are now starting to make a lot more sense when it comes to something just like this, like a physical chronic ailment, right, or pain. And I would imagine that now we've got a bigger problem, because once that process is occurring, now we've got the conscious aspect of the brain, the other parts of the brain that are interpreting what's going on, now starting to feed into that process. Yeah. The individual now becoming more concerned about what's going on, and that's probably lighting up other areas of the brain, and so on, right?
Yes. So we're very keen to emphasize to our patients that this is all happened unconsciously. Often it's beyond your conscious control or even awareness. Yeah. Like I went to India, I got a stomach bug, I came back, I wasn't wanting to be ill, I wanted to be well.
Right.
Sure, there was some background concern. But eventually, as you say, once that conditioned loop has started occurring, then yes, your conscious mind gets involved, because it has an impact on these lower brain centers, where the further concern there is or worry, the more it amplifies that particular circuitry to tell the unconscious brain, we are in danger. This is a bad thing. Yeah. And I'd like to pick up on actually the underlying reason for this is, you may have heard of the triune brain theory, where there's this idea that we have three layers of brain development, the kind of more ancient reptilian brain, the mammalian brain, and then the cortex and neocortex are built on top. Now, that particular theory has been challenged, and it's not necessarily true in a specific sense, but as a general sense, it's very interesting to see that the reptilian brain, and more the kind of brainstem, has its own way of processing pain. Then you have the emotional centers, the amygdala and hippocampus. They have their own way of processing pain. Then you have the conscious rational mind, which has its own way of processing pain. And the reason these vicious loops happen is because each center is attempting to communicate with each other, but sometimes mistakes happen in that communication in terms of what the right response is. And eventually our prefrontal cortex, our conscious rational mind, can no longer control those underlying reptilian and mammalian automatic responses that are attempting to ensure survival.
Yes. And so that becomes the problem when the message seems to go out a lot of times, which is a very frustrating message, which I think really needs to be hit home with people, is that they can somehow will themselves through their pain, or it can just kind of stop it. And that is a problem. Or even just processes just as thinking positively. I mean, these are things that are probably scratching the surface on that top part, right? But that's certainly not going to necessarily, filter down into that reptilian response, right? So there has to be far more work done, but that leads to a lot of frustration because people are like, well, I think positively and, my condition isn't getting better. I mean, certainly it has an impact, but like just thinking positively about your problem and so forth isn't the whole thing, right? Because it is not a psychological process.
Absolutely. And the example I give is learning to drive a car, right? So when you learn to drive a car, if you sat there on your very first lesson and said, I'm going to be super positive and I'm going to be really, I'm going to do this, I'm going to be brilliant and fantastic at this. It doesn't matter how positive you aren't going to be able to learn, you aren't going to be able to drive that car on the first lesson, right? Because you need to train your nervous system and your brain to get it. And that's where you move the steering wheel, press the gas, do your indicator, et cetera, and that requires repetition, right? And that is the process of neural rewiring or retraining. And positivity creates a nice environment for that to happen, but is not the retraining per se. So this is very different to CBT, cognitive, approaches. It is really neuroplasticity and brain retraining approaches.
And so we have that element. And let's talk about another piece of this is just kind of coming to mind too, which is as you talked about the more medical based concepts, is that the solutions to a lot of these conditions are still based on, in the way that I would put it, is called the bottom-up approach, right? So they've got the top down, but the bottom up. They're trying to alter what is going on actually from the bottom, from the body and the physiology. So whether that means, in fibromyalgia, looking for different things like thyroid hormone to treat it or other types of metabolic therapies. And my wife is a specialist, is a clinical nutritionist who works with complex gastrointestinal disorders. So there's a lot of current research that's coming around bacterial overgrowth problems in SIBO, for example, and how that generates inflammation. And as you talked about, how that inflammation can affect the brain chemistry and depression and so forth. So we've got these two kind of competing things going on. So I'm really interested in particular, as we move forward, discussing and kind of pulling apart how the Gupta program will tackle dealing with bottom-up stuff and a top-down approach. So the value in figuring out in particular, which is, I think for almost any clinician, is going to be very difficult to try to figure out what the primary inputs are to the system that are driving this constant threat response. So what is, and as you found throughout the program, I'm kind of getting ahead of myself here. How do you kind of see that whole soup occurring in terms of how all of that stuff is occurring at the same time?
Yeah. So really interesting question. And I think I give the analogy of you're standing on a bridge and there's a river below you, and suddenly you see some people in the river and you're like, oh my God, I need to jump in and save them, right? So you jump in, you save the person. Then there's another person coming down the river. So you jump in again and you save them. And that is important. You need to save those people. But you also need to ask, who the hell is throwing these people in the river in the first place?
Right. Exactly.
Upstream, right? Because if we can fix that, then we don't need to keep saving them downstream.
Yes.
So we have a very complementary approach, which is do both, right? So absolutely, we work with functional and integrative doctors, nutritionists, etc., who are doing fantastic work at looking at the impact of this over-inflammatory response, this over-stimulated nervous system response. It has impacts on the gut. It has impacts on the body. So supplementation, enzymes, all of these things are fantastic. At the same time, I believe those practitioners can get better outcomes if they also look at the brain aspect of it as well. Who's throwing these people in the first place? And that's where our program comes in, and we're working. And now we have many doctors actually who are having our program as part of their overall package, because they get better outcomes and quicker outcomes.
Yes.
And so that's how we work, is to see it in a very kind of complementary way. And certainly in our program as well, we have an overall guideline about anti-inflammatory diet, getting good sleep, activity levels, pacing, re-engaging with joy. It's a very, very holistic program. And, that's why I think working at both ends is super important. Because as you say, there is this feedback loop from the gut back to the brain. So if the gut then is now the bigger problem than the brain, that itself becomes its own vicious cycle where the gut is triggering the brain to say we're in danger and something's wrong. The
Yes.
brain is in turn triggering the entire body to create the inflammation in the gastric areas, which then causes those challenges. So once again, you're back into a game of tennis. So looking at both is great.
And I think that I'm sure you probably agree with this. I'm hallucinating. Is the most complicated part is, first of all, just trying to explain this to people, that because they're so familiar with, I think, the public at large as what I would call the sniper approach that occurs in medicine, which is the one shot, one kill mentality, right? You create a specific diagnosis. This is the root of your problem. This is the medication, the surgery, or the specific protocol to fix that problem. Whereas when we're dealing with a chronic issue, it oftentimes has dragged in more systems and more things occurring at the same time. And it's kind of no longer one thing that is actually the thing that's causing. It could be. I mean, I have people that come in and I do something simple with them, and it ends up kind of being the thing that, like a domino effect, helps a lot of things. But more often than not, multiple things have to be addressed at the same time. And to some degree, it's hard for most people to wrap their head around this concept. And I think that's kind of the magic of your program, which is also trying to get people into a bigger step back, bigger view of what is occurring. So maybe they don't get lost so much in the minutia or the details of the, I don't know, dozens and dozens of contributing factors that are really contributing to this overall problem. Yeah.
Yes. And I think it's really living the idea of holistic health, because, I also work with practitioners where sometimes it's like, we've done, these 50 measurements and that enzyme's off by 10% and this is off by 20%. And you're thinking, great, absolutely want to correct that. But it's kind of moving the deck chairs around on the Titanic. It's not really getting to the root cause of asking, well, why are those enzymes out of whack? Why are the blood tests showing this? What's really causing this at a deeper level? And so we've got to be very careful as complementary and alternative practitioners that we don't fall into the same hole as mainstream medicine, which is this reductionist philosophy that if we can just fix these tiny little measurements downstream, that will fix the overall problem. And sometimes it does, as you say, absolutely, sometimes it does. But often when they get stressed, that patient will come back into our room and say, well, actually, it helped me before, but now it's not helping me and I'm feeling worse, or whatever it may be. We often get these recurring patients because actually their stress system and the downstream effects have got linked together. So as soon as they go back into a stressful situation or don't feel supported, symptomatology comes back. Yeah. So it's definitely living the holistic kind of health paradigm.
I think and I would love your opinion on this too. And I think that there's a key issue that we run into with this work. And I think one of the reasons why it gets stuck into that reductionist mentality is a lot of alternative health practitioners trying to prove that this is a valid issue. And I think that, of course, from the medical side, they operate very much on being able to show lab values and so forth that determine this is actually an issue. But the problem with that, of course, is that there's lots of incongruence, meaning I find that the medical system at whole sometimes it does that and sometimes it doesn't, but at the same time, they don't leave a lot of leeway for this kind of practice to actually exist without being able to specifically measure it. And for example, you can't look at cortisol, for example, to see how stressed people are. My wife and I talk about this a lot, is that during acute stress, cortisol is oftentimes elevated because you see the body is trying to fight off an infection or deal with an acute stressor. But a lot of times in these chronic conditions, people have normal cortisol levels. So in particular, how do you square that up? The medical system generally has a problem with this because the person is stressed, but unless you're going to stick them in an MRI and look at their brain while they're stressed, there's no way to validate this. So they're going to look at this and say, how do you take this and make it real and help people understand that it's a real thing? And I feel like there's a lot of pressure to validate it. And, we were talking about this. Are there any ways that people, are trying to connect this with HRV, heart rate variability measurements, with EEG? Is there anything that's really kind of trying to ground this for people? I mean, because it does help them, I think, to some degree, to talk about the neuroscience and show the research and the support. I know you've got a pilot study going on right now, but how are you working to try to make this a real thing for people, to show them that it's not just some aloof topic?
Yeah, and it's a big question, especially in the complementary and alternative space. And for us, it is about getting the randomized controlled trials.
Yeah.
I think that's absolutely key for us to show subjective measures. And that's great because people want to feel better and less pain, but also looking at any objective measures. So as you know, we actually were the first neuroplasticity program in the world to publish a randomized controlled trial on our treatments for fibromyalgia. And that showed a great positive result compared to the control group, a 40% reduction in fibro scores within 8 weeks, but zero impact in the control group. And we also measured BDNF, which is brain-derived neurotrophic factor. And that also, as an objective marker, reduced back to normal levels when it's normally elevated in fibromyalgia. So then, once again, once you start showing this type of scientific research, you can say, although this is a holistic approach, look at the results that we're actually getting when we employ this holistic approach. And it's recognizing that the modern way of doing medicine, which is something goes wrong with you, you come to a clinic and you have a pill and you're given 5 minutes with a doctor, that is not a system that's fit for purpose for health. It's fit for purpose for sickness, but it's not fit for purpose for health. And unfortunately, fortunately, that is beginning to change and people are beginning to recognize it. But our systems are stuck in that particular way of thinking. So people are having to go outside the system to look at that. Now, it's recognizing that, for instance, people who suffer from anxiety are 2 to 3 times more likely to have physical symptoms in their body from a particular physical condition. A Harvard study in 2015, which should have made front page news around the world, found that people who meditated for 20 minutes, and this was a study with 5,000 participants, people who meditated for 20 minutes and learned something about resilience had a 42% reduction in visits to hospitals and doctors. Yeah. Now, if there was a pill that came out that said, right, we can reduce medical visits by 42%, it would be the miracle drug of the 21st century.
Without side effects. Without side effects. People would be like, no, that's a miracle. And yet we have it today. It's proven and should be on every doctor's prescription. Is like, yeah, take this pill, but also meditate because that will halve your halve your visits to a doctor or a hospital. Yes.
But we have this knowledge, we have the science behind it. And now it's shifting the zeitgeist to say, we as human beings need to take massively more responsibility for preventative healthcare and employ these things in daily life rather than waiting for something to go wrong and then seeing a doctor, because that is not, it's not fit for purpose. And that's why people are getting sicker. So no matter all the medical advancements we've had, people are getting sicker. People are visiting their doctors more than they were 20, 30 years ago. How did we get into that situation? It's incredible. People's levels of anxiety and stress are increasing no matter all the talk about mental health. So something is clearly going wrong. And we and people like yourselves are all working in this area to try and, make this mainstream to say there are other ways of tackling mental, physical, and emotional conditions that have longer term positive impact.
And I think one of the solutions is, and I've thought about this for so long, is that there literally needs to be, as a gatekeeper, when you enter into the medical system, your primary care practitioner needs to make the differentiation as to whether you need to go to the more alternate or the more traditional route of medicine. You have an acute issue, there's red flags present. Or number 2, you have a chronic condition, and then you see a chronic specialist, the specialist who thinks using this material and starts to coach and educate and give the patient the things that they need versus pushing them into this model. So if you've got the gut issues stuff going on and they've cleared you for medical pathology, they're like, there's nothing really here going on that we need to immediately deal with. You need to move on a separate path. But what's happening is those people are going down this path. And then if you have these symptoms, it's always putting out those fires. And again, just in that case right there, that person is not going to get anything else from the traditional medical route, usually outside of medication, because it's the only way that they can deal with that. But now the person has many other problems that are associated with it taking the medications. And 9 times out of 10, the initial problem isn't addressed, because then they, it washes out their feelings or the intensity of the anxiety, but that's it. I can't even tell you how many people come to me and that they're on pain medications, they're on depression medications and so forth. And when I ask them, I was like, does it fix the problem? And they go, no, it just lessens it. And it's like, well, it's still not even helping the problem other than just reducing the immediate intensity of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I agree with you that this is about, this is not denigrating the medical profession in any way, because actually there's an incredible amount of things that they do that are
absolutely
really amazing. So I want to be very, very clear about that. But as you say, it's more about funneling people into the right course of action.
Yes.
And so 70 to 80% of the patients that visit a medical practitioner actually come under the chronic category, where they go through the system, there are this thing that's done for them, that thing that's done for them, and the doctor eventually feels that they have to do something, so they prescribe, as you say, some kind of pill that's going to help them, and they create short-term impact. And then when the person tries to come off those pills, there is an addictive impact, which then makes the person feel that the drugs are doing something. But actually, we know that a lot of these drugs are not much more effective than placebo. Actually, a lot of pain medication, a lot of psychotropics, sorry, not psychotropics, but antidepressant type medications aren't much more effective than placebo. And really, there needs to be something else that's done. So in the UK, they've now got a big push. If someone comes in with depression, actually, the doctor needs to talk about activities that they can take part in, social activities like dancing, music, going for a walk in the forest, all of those things as the primary intervention versus just prescribing pills that are 2% more effective than placebo. Right? Yes. And we know, for instance, that if someone goes for a walk in the greenery for half an hour a day, that's far more effective on the serotonin levels than antidepressants.
Yes. And that's the issue. And I'll make clear, just to clarify, my problem is not with doctors. It's with the systems by which they are constrained by. And the systems say that, if a patient comes in, this is what you have to give them. But the problem is that the research is so much more supportive of all of those other things, but they're not just kind of in the standard operating procedure in which a lot of doctors are forced to stay within certain boundaries and systems, depending on where they work and if they're in private practice and so forth. And that's kind of the issue, where the vast majority of people are going into situations where those systems do constrain what the doctors oftentimes recommend. And that becomes an issue. This happens in physical therapy with people with pain. There's a lot of physical therapists very brilliant, up to date on, new evidence-based approaches that don't fall within that traditional terrain, but they're not able to employ them just because, again, the constraints of the way that the system dictates what they do with their patients.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's a problem of the system itself. Yes. And, for me, the answer is technology. So obviously, we produced our Gupta program as being online and available to anybody in that sense, so anyone can sign up. But also, we developed an app called iRise, which we've just launched. And that's supposed to be a very, it's $10 a month, but it gives you access to, 600 courses and classes and all these types of things. So that once again, a doctor, if they're thinking, what can I do for this person? They've got an option to say, well, actually, there's this app out there that is holistic, that does everything, right? It gives you your dance, your exercise, your meditation, your holistic health, how to deal with anxiety. It's all there in one place. So I don't need to do the thinking of which practitioner do I need to send you to, or which resource do I need to send you to. Yeah.
And so let's move right into that, because what you've done is to seemingly take this immense, daunting task of taking all of this information and actually condensing it down into something that is user-friendly. So that's awesome. So out of all of this conversation, because almost immediately person's going to jump to, well, what do you do about this? And you've taken that and you've kind of encapsulated that, and that's in the Gupta program. So taking this and taking that person who's overwhelmed, who doesn't understand this very well, and then bringing it into literally a step-by-step fashion. So let's talk about what you've done with that and how you actually lay out this program for solutions for retraining the nervous system and dealing with this. Okay.
Yeah. So this is something that we've developed over the last 20 years. And we were the first neuroplasticity program to publish in 2007. So originally it was a DVD program. It's a very old school. And in the last few years, it's now been converted into an online program. Yep. It's purely online. And we will convert it into an app as well eventually. And essentially, the purpose of this, or the deeper reason behind this, is there was only so many patients that I could see at my clinic. We had to create something that was, as you say, something that many people could consume. And it's 15 interactive video sessions, which are shot in the beautiful mountains of Switzerland, and about 20 or 30 audio exercises. And then there's weekly webinars with myself. There's coaches that can support people one-on-one. And there's a very supportive community as well of people helping each other through this. So it's a whole ecosystem of support to help with chronic illness. And it's something where certain people are quite self-motivated and they can take things on like that. And other people, they decide to work with our coaches instead and say, well, actually, I need someone to coach me through the process of recovery. So whatever style people prefer, there's something for them, in the Gupta program. And yeah, the Gupta program is based on three core concepts, three R's of the Gupta program. The first R is retraining the brain. And that's the unique core of the program. How do we train the brain out of these over responses of overstimulating the nervous system and immune system and bring it back to balance? Yeah, so that's the first R. The second R is relaxing the nervous system. It's almost impossible to rewire your brain if somebody is, hyper-stimulated, hyper-aroused, right?
Yes.
So, give you an example. It's like if you come home after a hard day's work, husband and wife come home and they're both stressed out. They're going to claw at each other, right? They're going to start having little arguments because they're just stuck in their way of being and they can't see the other person's point of view. Yeah. But when they relax and perhaps meditate and calm down, they come together, then their brains are more flexible and they say, actually, you know what? I can see your point of view and I'm sorry and whatever, right? So it's always that neuroplasticity literally teaches don't have an argument when you're stimulated, right? Because you won't get anywhere. It's going to be completely pointless. So in the same way, relaxing the nervous system is about preparing the brain for neuroplasticity, for retraining. So that incorporates breathing exercises, meditation, holistic health, getting lots of sleep, pacing yourself, all of those great things, and an anti-inflammatory diet. And the third R of the Gupta program is re-engaging with joy. And that's often a missing piece of our modern healthcare, which is we know that when people feel happy inside, for whatever reason it may be, their health outcomes are so much better. Yeah. Why aren't we harnessing that in medicine right now? Yeah. And so what we do is teach people to understand what are the small things in life that bring them joy, mindfulness and bringing them joy through the everyday situations of their lives, how to deal with little stresses and strains so it doesn't bring us down. And laughing, singing, laughter yoga, all of these different things we incorporate into our program. And that is also a very important supportive piece as well.
I think that, and just something that just came to mind as you're saying that too, is that the irony there, the challenge that we find, maybe it's a paradox, which is the issue of essentially our immune systems are so significantly impacted by those kinds of states of consciousness, but yet here we are in a pandemic where they're trying to figure out why these issues are spreading so fast amongst a population that is declining in terms of hope, loss of so much business and family members who may have died during COVID. And everything is kind of moving downward in terms of being so dismal, but yet what we need is the opposite in order to actually fight the pandemic. So it's such an interesting thing to consider, especially with what's going on in the world right now. And it's undervalued, it's underplayed. And I'm sure that, there's research to support that. I almost guarantee that is, and I haven't even looked at it, but the state of consciousness somebody's in, positive states that they experience, positively affecting their recovery and their immune system.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, there's plenty of research on the state of being, the state of mind impacting on that, and how stress directly decreases aspects of your immune system. And even that laughing, singing, dancing has a massive positive impact on our health. And a final thing I'd like to mention on this is actually loneliness. So the number one factor for health is, in fact, how connected do we feel to the people around us? And unfortunately, we live in a society where you might have 500 friends on Facebook, but you've got to stand in the bathroom taking a selfie.
Yes. And I've seen some research on that too, that was talking about, I think that you can't quote the exact stats, but something like the average person only has one person in their social circle that they feel they can confide in, or less, which is scary considering how much population growth we have, how many people, 360 million people in America over here anyway. And then yet people are just so socially isolated, right? That's a big problem considering what you just talked about. So
we're becoming more connected, but feeling more lonely.
Yep.
Yeah. And that is actually, social media is part of that, because social media encourages our ego to present a certain face or a certain facet of our lives and to not show vulnerability. Wow. And that's beginning to change now. People are beginning to open up and be more vulnerable, certainly amongst Gen Zs and younger millennials. They're more open about their feelings. But in fact, what's happening is we're feeling less connected because we think that social media and technology substitutes for real world interaction and personal connection.
Yes.
And the research shows that we actually need around 5 to 6 really good close friends or family members that we can open up to, that we can connect with. And that that minimum 5 or 6 people is what really keeps us in a good state of mental health, knowing that we have that support network around us. And yet many of us don't have that because of the way modern society is now structured around social media. So it's really fascinating.
And, and there's so many hidden pieces that are built into these programs as well. Usually is, connecting with whether or not that's your online program and or the coaches, and creating a connection with somebody, but also having a supportive community as well. So that kind of all builds in and works upon each other. And what I love most is, again, and what drew me to your program in particular was that you're really getting ahead and putting this information out there and bringing, like I said, some real substance to it, the research, and showing people what is actually happening. And I think that has become an issue of overcoming a lot of reluctance that people have, whereas we're usually just telling people, drink more water and get out and talk with people and so forth. And it's not really grounding, or it's not getting in there. And people are it just sounds like a very loose recommendation. And yet here we are with the science behind it that's showing that this is actually what we need to do. And I think that's the direction that we all are going with this, is to try to show people that there's valid things that are actually changing in your body. And like I said, kind of circling back, is that people don't see this as a real problem. It just sounds like some, airy fairy, hey, positive thinking stuff. It is not. There is much to support this. And of course, the mountains of testimonials and so forth that you have on your program, all people just need to do is to go to your website and read about it. And especially like when people have been doing, in particular, a lot of that self-work, they've been cleaning up their diet, they've been exercising a little bit more, and they're missing a big piece. And the big piece is all of the stuff that the program offers. And I think those people, right away, when they get to the homepage and start reading, and after having this discussion, they're going to see that is indeed the missing piece. So they're going to feel right at home as they get going with the program and just kind of filling in all the gaps that they've been missing. And I think they're going to have it's just going to feel so amazing that it's like, oh, this is the thing. I can't believe that there is something out there. And that was my feeling when I found it. I'm like, somebody's doing this. This is amazing.
Thank you, Sam. You're so kind.
Really?
Yeah. It's been a labor of love for the last 20 years. We've all been working hard at the clinic because our aim is just to get people well, just to help people.
Yeah.
And picking up on your point about what's important to us is that there's scientific validity behind what we do.
Yes.
Yeah, that's so important. So everything that we prescribe to people, like meditation, like breathing techniques, we thoroughly research the science behind it. So yes, meditation, huge amount of research behind it. Breathing techniques, huge amount of research behind it. Anti-inflammatory diets, quite a lot of research around that. So, and then overall, our program, if people follow the program, we want to do larger scale trials. So we want to do phase 3 trials with hundreds of patients and a control group, and saying, look, this is what we can do for long COVID. This is what we can do for pain syndromes, which are unexplained, or fibromyalgia. And when we have that kind of data, then it becomes more mainstream, because I want to get to the stage where programs like ours, or our program, becomes the first port of call that insurance companies are saying, there's enough clinical evidence now that if somebody comes into your clinic with chronic pain, right away, they don't go down this rabbit hole of a system that doesn't really do much. They prescribe this program right from the start within that traditional ecosystem. And then they have much better chances of shifting it. Because if you get to this neurological issue straight away in the first 6 months, first year, of course, there's less neurological conditioning, and therefore, hopefully, we get better and quicker outcomes as well.
I would say even sooner than that. I mean, I think that the research that I read on pain to chronic pain is about 25% of people from acute pain develop chronic pain. And the factors that are actually involved in the development of chronic pain is all of the things that we had just talked about, which is concern, worry, fear, not understanding what's going on with them, not being supported, not getting, all of those things that reduce the likelihood of developing a chronic problem. So I think this stuff should be introduced all the way from the beginning, a lot of reassurance. And I think, what I've always said, that there's a big movement now about orthopedic doctors and orthopedic organizations saying, hey, stop running so many MRIs and X-rays on people that just need reassurance, and tell them to get back to activity. Because they're overly pathologizing some issues that really aren't the problem. Like there's lots of people walking around with disc bulges out there But when people are told this stuff, oh, you got a bad back, you got arthritis, now that's increasing the likelihood of that person developing a chronic issue because it raises the alert in the brain. So to me, it's like the sooner the better. And the more, even when people are educated that don't have problems, the less likelihood they may develop a chronic problem. Just as they have the normal experiences of life. We're all going to have aches and pains. We're all going to have fatigue issues sometimes. You know, the more knowledgeable and educated the public is, I think we can ward off these problems before they even start. I think that's really where the magic is, right? Is prevention.
Yeah. So I think this is it. It's, 99% of health spending is emergency care, essentially, or not even emergency care, it's sickness spending. And that idea of pathologizing everything. So as soon as you have an enzyme that's out of whack here, or this neurotransmitter is low, pathologizing that and creating drugs that try to treat that. It's, once again, it's that downstream thing. It's not really getting to the core. And that's why, for instance, in the US compared to Europe, there's twice as many prescriptions per head of population than there are in Europe.
Yeah.
Now, why is that? Because America has a history of being kind of very reductionist in the way it presents medical care. And also that it is based upon a system where, unfortunately, there is a financial incentive to over-pathologize, over-prescribe. Otherwise, it's not, Americans aren't necessarily twice as unwell as Europeans. Why are they being pathologized twice as badly and consuming more prescription drugs and ironically having less good health outcomes than Europeans? Like, there's something badly wrong with the system if that's what's going on.
Yep.
And so, let's really, all of us need to kind of work together and try and figure out how we can shift the system.
Well, this is the starting point, podcast and getting messages out there. I mean, this has definitely been an amazing medium rather than you and I just having a one-to-one conversation. We're going to splatter this information everywhere we possibly can. So let's talk about where people can find stuff. How do we access the program? Give all the listeners kind of the info or the download on where they can check everything out and get involved.
Sure. So our neuroplasticity program is called the Gupta Program. So people can go to guptaprogram.com, which is GUPTA program.com. And there they can sign up for a free trial. So you can take the 28-day free trial or watch lots of videos that come into your inbox, get a feel for the program, see if it's right for you. And then if they choose to go forward with the program, they can purchase the program. And with that, you get weekly webinars with myself, you get a manual in the post, you get access to all the online content. And until we have that large randomized controlled trial, we offer a 1-year money-back guarantee.
Wow.
Which is kind of unheard of. So you can use the program for up to a year. And if you find it doesn't help you, no questions asked, you send it back, you get a refund.
Yeah.
So people have nothing to lose by, kind of giving it a go.
That's a no-brainer. And it's very hard to imagine how you don't get any benefit from that, unless you're just not participating at all. And of course, that's a different kind of problem. That's a different kind of problem.
There are some actions that people, need to take. But so that's how the program works. And it's really also helping people understand that it's an agnostic program in the sense of the neuroplasticity techniques don't really care what condition you have. So people are using it for any chronic fatigue syndrome, fibromyalgia, chemical sensitivities, mold illness, right through to anorexia, addictions. That's not what we formally prescribe it for, but it's literally whatever your pattern your brain is stuck in. This is a system to enable you to get to where you want to go, how you want to shift the neurology. And that's really exciting. So although we're, targeting randomized controlled trials in specific areas, actually we'd love to do them on OCD using our program, or addictions, or things which are quite stubborn and quite difficult to treat in mainstream psychology. Because we think that this is what we've done is we've identified almost the kind of the neuroanatomy of change. Yep. So if somebody wasn't doing our program, but they had a certain pattern and they were able to shift it quickly, this would be the unconscious process that would have occurred. So we've mapped that out and then made something concrete that people can actively use to shift their way of thinking or way of being.
And that's a great point. And I think at a certain point, we're starting to get to the idea that even though all of these issues seem to be completely different, they really have a common theme to them, that if you address the common theme, then maybe these specific issues aren't so different, or maybe they're just different genetic expressions, or just combination of genetics and environment that makes it end up the way that it is. Why somebody gets anxiety, why somebody else has pain, but it's all stemming from the same thing. It's just expressed differently.
Definitely. And going to a deeper level of what you just said there, we also like to look at people's conditions at the different layers of their existence. So we look at the physical level, absolutely. But then we look at the emotional level. Then we look at the mental level. But we also look at the spiritual level. And spiritual doesn't necessarily mean, a belief in God or whatever, but we can all connect to the idea there's something beyond what we just kind of can touch and feel. And even quantum physics, tells us that. And so when people address the kind of deeper reasons, about their motivations in life, their purpose in life, that also has a connection to illness that can come to us. So when you operate at all of those different layers, healing becomes faster, because you don't know what unconsciously may be impacting on your health.
Yeah. So I have that concept, the higher levels modulate the lower levels. So you got to kind of figure out, but sometimes you do higher level work and it doesn't necessarily make changes smaller, but it depends. You got to be able to leap around, right? And try to address any of the ones that you think make sense for the individual. Yeah. But there you go. That is a holistic approach. And so that is it in the truest sense, isn't it?
Definitely. And, this kind of concept that actually, many conditions come to us when we least expect it, or it's something which, is a real hassle in our lives or a block in our lives. Can we go one step deeper and understand, is there a deeper reasoning behind this, or a deeper meaning? Is there something that I need to shift in my lifestyle, or the way I think, or the people that I surround myself with, of which this condition is simply a symptom of that, at a deeper level? And then you start seeing a condition rather than as a negative thing, actually as a positive thing, to start getting you to meditate, getting you to look after your health, getting you into self-care. So if we shift our perspective and see every condition is here for perhaps a deeper reason, that also helps us to heal and recover.
And a way to learn and a way to progress forward, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. Well, Ashok, thank you so much for being here. I don't want to take up all your time. I'm sure I could talk for hours. There's tons more. And at some point, I will have you back. I will coerce you to come back on here, and we'll talk about some more specific strategies. I'm sure like in 3 months' time, there'll be so much more new information to talk about. So I absolutely want to do that. I encourage everybody who's listening, all the audience, go check out this program. You got nothing to lose here. 28 days for free. You've got a year money back guarantee. I put my stamp on it. Go check it out. It'll be very helpful for you. So Ashok, thank you again so much for being here. Everybody, I'll put stuff in the show notes to make sure you have the links, and pretty much see you next time.
Great. Thank you so much, Sam. Lovely to be here.